Majestic 12, an organization said to be at the heart of some of the biggest conspiracies in the United States, from Roswell to the Kennedy assassination. But what is Majestic 12? Well, if you're super into alien conspiracy stuff, you'll have seen them crop up all over the place. Said to be a top secret organization consisting of scientists, military leaders, and government officials who investigate alien spacecraft. Some even say they not only have direct contact with extraterrestrials, but work with them as well. Being given access to their technology, in exchange they cover up the aliens' presence on Earth while allowing them to study us. But that's a more outlandish version of the conspiracy. At the core though, they're said to at least have knowledge of aliens, and maybe even work on reverse engineering their technology, doing alien autopsies on extraterrestrials that have crash landed on Earth, that sort of thing. This is basically what Bob Lazar was claiming to have seen while working at Area 51. You could start to see how much Majestic 12, or MJ12 as they're often called, are really at the core of almost every United States government alien conspiracy. The JFK assassination is often described as the mother of all conspiracies, and yes, with just a little digging, you'll find that MJ12 is mentioned here too. Some people believe that Kennedy found out about MJ12 and the secret dealings they had with aliens. Supposedly, he wanted to reveal the truth to the American public, thinking they had a right to know. This of course didn't sit well with MJ12, who were determined to keep everything under wraps. On top of that, or maybe alternatively, depending on who you talk to, Kennedy was sticking his nose where MJ12 didn't want him to, trying to have the US and the Soviets work together, but this would mean sharing sensitive information with them about UFOs, and MJ12 didn't want that. One piece of evidence that fueled this theory is a document called the Burned Memo. This document surfaced in the 90s, and it's said to be a memo from an MJ12 member ordering someone to essentially terminate Kennedy, using coded language of course. The memo mentions Lancer, which was Kennedy's Secret Service code name. Now another part of the theory involves a speech Kennedy gave at the United Nations in 1963, where he talked about the need for cooperation between the US and the Soviet Union, even suggesting they should work together in space exploration. So some believe this was a veiled reference that he was making for his desire to share UFO secrets with the world. There's also a memo that Kennedy sent to the CIA asking for a review of UFO files. He wanted to be debriefed on the unknowns, as he referred to them as in the memo. And what's very eerie is that this memo was dated just 10 days before he was killed. So, did MJ12 see him as a threat to their secrecy and decided they needed to dispose of him? Now, how exactly did MJ12 get started? Well, for that, we gotta go all the way back to the Roswell incident. Just how many dots are we gonna be connecting in this video? I told you, these guys are everywhere. So in July of 1947, something crashed near Roswell, New Mexico. The military first reported it as a flying disc, and this news spread like wildfire. But soon after, the story was changed. They claimed it was now just a weather balloon. So why this quick switch up? Was it really just a weather balloon, or was something else going on? Well, according to some, there was 100% something else going on. There are a lot of people who think the government was hiding something big. They suspected that the military had actually recovered an alien spacecraft and possibly even alien bodies from that crash site. This theory got stronger over the years as more people, including supposed whistleblowers, came forward with their own stories. MJ12 is said to have spawned out of this Roswell incident, a secret group created by President Harry Truman. Story goes that the group was formed to manage and cover up all information about UFOs and extraterrestrials, particularly what was found at Roswell, and apparently they've been operating in the shadows ever since. But when did the rumors about MJ12 begin? I mean, if they're so top secret, how did word about them start spreading in the first place? Well, the origins of the Majestic 12 conspiracy go back to the 80s. So in 1984, a UFO researcher named Jamie Shendere got an envelope in the mail with some film inside. When he developed the film, it apparently showed 8 pages of documents that looked like they were briefing papers for something called Operation Majestic 12. These papers described a secret group of 12 people, the names of scientists, military leaders, and government officials. More on them later. Then on May 31st, 1987, a British UFO researcher named Timothy Good claimed that he had documents from the 50s that revealed a secret committee called Majestic 12. And these documents apparently detailed everything I just outlined. This group was formed in 1947 by an order from President Harry S. Truman. The documents said the committee's job was to cover up the crash of the alien spacecraft at Roswell in July of 47. So figure out how to use the alien technology they found and decide how the US should deal with extraterrestrial life in the future. Who are some of the big names that were said to be in Majestic 12 though? Vannevar Bush was a key figure during World War II. He was a brilliant engineer and inventor, probably most famous for his work on the infamous Manhattan Project. He also helped create the National Science Foundation and was an advisor to President Roosevelt and President Truman. His name shows up in the MJ-12 documents and was allegedly part of the organization. If MJ-12 is real, Bush's inclusion would make sense. I mean, he worked on the Manhattan Project. If he was helping to build a nuclear bomb, why wouldn't he be involved in top secret UFO research? James Forrestal was the first US Secretary of Defense, appointed in 1947. Before that, he was a Secretary of the Navy. He was heavily involved in the early Cold War period, and he had access to some of the most classified information. He would have been a logical choice for a group like MJ-12. On top of that, there's always been some mystery as to the exact circumstances of his death in 1949, which some think may have had something to do with his involvement in MJ-12. Roscoe H. Hillenkotter was the first director of the CIA, serving from 1947 to 1950. He later joined the board of the National Investigations Committee on Aerial Phenomena, which is a civilian UFO research group. Makes sense why he'd be here. These are just a few of the names, of course. And now that we've dove into what this organization is, the history of it, who could have been involved, let's get into some of the criticism. We can't talk about Majestic 12 without mentioning the highly controversial Cutler-Twining memo. So I mentioned Jamie Chenderay before, who'd received an envelope with photos of documents detailing MJ-12. Well, just a year later in 1985, he and two other well-known UFOologists, Shanton T. Friedman and Bill Moore, had been on the hunt for declassified files in the National Archives when they apparently received a series of anonymous messages leading them to a very interesting document. The memo is a one-page document dated July 14, 1954. It was allegedly written by Robert Cutler, who was President Eisenhower's national security advisor, and addressed to General Nathan Twining. Twining was a high-ranking Air Force officer, which makes this memo a pretty big deal if it's real. The document briefly mentions MJ-12 and talks about a meeting which some people think was related to UFOs and alien technology. People who believe in MJ-12 and UFO cover-ups saw this as a major piece of proof that MJ-12 was real and involved in hiding information about UFOs. Here's where it gets controversial though. There are several problems with this memo. First, there's no official record of a meeting on the date mentioned in the memo. Second, the style and format of the memo don't match the official documents from that time. Even the typeface used is apparently off. Another big issue is that Robert Cutler was actually out of the country on the date the memo was supposedly written. A lot of these arguments were brought forward by a UFO researcher and skeptic named Philip J. Klass and the FBI. But Klass was often labeled as a disinformation agent by conspiracy theorists. And again, even the FBI chimed in though. The FBI dug into the Cutler-Twining memo and other supposed MJ-12 documents. They began their investigation in 1988 after receiving copies of these supposed documents. There were apparently discrepancies in the language and terminology that would have been used in a document like this. Another big issue was the content of the documents themselves. The FBI stated that the information seemed out of place. It seemed to be suspiciously tailored to fit the UFO conspiracy theories that were very popular in the 80s, rather than reflecting what would have been talked about at the time the documents were supposedly formed. It just seemed like someone had written them with modern UFO enthusiasts in mind, rather than being a genuine historical document. So in the end, the FBI declared the MJ-12 documents to be falsified and wrote bogus on them with big, bold letters. But did this really sway anyone who was highly skeptical of the government in the first place? Yeah, not really. And I mean, fair enough. It would make sense for an intelligence and security service organization like the FBI to cover up or downplay something like this. So, does MJ12 still exist? Did they ever exist at all? Well, they may or may not, but if the whole thing is fake, then how and why was this conspiracy concocted? Well, the first thought is that it's just UFO enthusiasts and conspiracy theorists looking too deeply into things and spotting things that aren't really there, but there's another possibility. I mentioned the UFO researcher Bill Moore earlier, who was one of the big names involved in the unearthing of these supposed MJ12 documents. Well, he actually started changing his tune about this whole thing. Moore thought that the government was covering something up. It just may have not been aliens, unfortunately. Instead, he thinks the whole thing was drummed up by the United States government as part of a mass disinformation campaign. The purpose? To distract the public from top secret Air Force projects that were really going on. It makes sense. People would get so excited by the idea that the government was interacting with extraterrestrials that they'd be totally blind to the actual nefarious stuff the government was working on. But there's another aspect to this theory as well. What if the disinformation campaign was formed by the government in order to lessen people's interest in aliens and UFOs? What do I mean by this? Well, think about it. The government creates the documents, lets the public obsess over them, then discredits them to make the whole topic of UFOs look silly. Purpose of this? UFOs and aliens really are existing and they just don't want the public to be focusing on it. Hey, who knows? With all that said though, what do you think about this whole MJ12 thing? Leave your thoughts and comments down below. I've been your host James and I'll catch you, yes you specifically, in the next video.